There is no such thing as an absolutely pure colour. Even the best formulated primary colours will have a small amount of other colours in them. For example, this is cadmium red, and it contains a fair amount of yellow, as we can see when we look at its colour profile. It also contains a tiny amount of blue, but this is insignificant compared to the yellow. Because cadmium red contains more yellow than blue, we say that it has a yellow bias, which pushes it a little towards red-orange on the colour wheel. This yellow content makes it ideal for mixing oranges, but prevents it from making good violets. To mix a good violet, we need a red that has a blue bias, such as permanent alizarin crimson. In its colour profile there is substantially more blue than yellow, and when mixed with ultramarine, a much better violet results. This chart is a direct comparison of the two violets. Compared to the alizarin crimson violet, the cadmium red violet is somewhat desaturated. Alizarin crimson has a blue bias, which places it a little towards violet, and French ultramarine has a red bias. These two colours can be considered to be sympathetic, as the direction of their bias points towards each other on the colour wheel. This is the reason why they mix to make good violets. Let's take a look at green mixes. Lemon yellow has a green bias, and when mixed with phthalo blue, are very good green results. The phthalo blue has a yellow bias, and both colours are sympathetic. The result is not as good with French ultramarine, because even though the lemon yellow has a blue bias, the ultramarine is unsympathetic. The muddiest green results from a mix of Indian yellow and French ultramarine, as both colours are unsympathetic. Notice how the red content of the greens keeps going up. This is because in these three examples we've gone from sympathetic colours to completely unsympathetic colours, effectively adding red to the green mix along the way. Red is the complementary to green, and it is the red content which is desaturating the green, resulting in the muddy appearance. Some colours have a strong bias, and others have very little. This colour wheel was painted using Winsor yellow, quinacridone red, and phthalo blue, all colours with very little bias. Notice that the greens and oranges are very clear, but the violets are poor as a result of phthalo blue's tendency to yellow. This colour wheel was painted using cobalt blue, cadmium yellow pale, and permanent rose. This time the violets are good, but the greens and oranges poor as a result of the cobalt blue and permanent rose having a sympathy for one another. In this example, French ultramarine, cadmium red, and Indian yellow were used. The oranges are good because the red and yellow are sympathetic, but both the greens and violets are poor because the biases are unsympathetic. Phthalo blue is in the middle of this chart, tinting to white at the bottom while mixing with cadmium yellow pale on the left and Indian yellow on the right. The bias of these colours determines that clearer greens result from the cadmium yellow pale mix. However, the Indian yellow greens are more natural looking and may well be a better choice for landscape painting. Let's take a look at some commonly used colours to see where their bias lies. Yellows with a red bias include New Gamboge, cadmium yellow, Indian yellow, and cadmium yellow deep. These are best for mixing oranges. Yellows with a blue bias include lemon yellow, Winsor lemon, bismuth yellow, and cadmium lemon, and these are best for mixing greens. Reds with a yellow bias include cadmium scarlet, vermilion, scarlet lake, and cadmium red. Use these for mixing oranges. Those with a blue bias include quinacridone red, alizarin crimson, permanent rose, carmine, and rose madder. These are best for mixing violets. Blues with a yellow bias are cerulean blue, Prussian blue, Winsor blue, manganese blue, and phthalo blue. These will mix to make the best greens, while cobalt blue and French ultramarine with a red bias will yield the best violets. Of the greens, sap green and hooker's green have a yellow bias, while cobalt turquoise, cobalt green and viridian have a blue bias.